I'm so happy to be here. It's been wonderful being in Helsinki, but also meeting all the incredibly creative, smart, wonderful people, grad students and professors at Aalto University. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'd like to talk with you like a little tiny bit about something from America, and then move on to the world, okay? This is where I'm from. This is one of my two towns, Scotia, New York, about 3.5 hours north of New York City. This is one of the main attractions in Scotia, New York. It's called Jumpin' Jacks, burgers and hot dogs, and in the summer, water skiing in the Mohawk River, where I grew up. This is my other town where I lived every summer, much smaller in the mountains, in the Adirondack Mountains, called Caroga Lake, New York. Very small town, pretty poor. I had no background, none, zero in contemporary art. I mean, contemporary art didn't really reach up there into the country where I'm from. And this is where I lived, where I worked. It's in a circa 1920s amusement park called Sherman's Amusement Park, which was the main business in our town. I was a carny, a teenage carny, working. I belonged to my family. My father, my paternal grandfather and paternal uncle. This was where, once upon a time, there were many people here at this arcade. That was my place. That's where I worked with the old-time games and the new video games. Now that's in a museum, and the museum is only open one afternoon a week. Once I told you this is a small town. Here's Sherman's Amusement Park now, bankrupt and abandoned. Here's Mr. Frosty, the sad, softy ice cream bear. And once upon a time, this was a thriving place, including when I worked and lived there. And this is my first real experience as a small town country kid with transformative visual culture. Once again, the town is remote and it's pretty poor, although very beautiful. And the amusement park, on certain nights when the Ferris wheel was lit and dazzling and all the rides were working, it turned our town into a destination. It made our town seem wondrous. And it was not all, lovely and thrilling. It was hard work. Starting when I was 12 years old, it was hard work, but somehow I absorbed this visual transformational culture, and that would have a big effect on me later. This is just a little what I'd like to talk with you. You mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's the greatest poet, philosopher of American Romanticism, called Transcendentalism. But I just want to mention just a couple things. As he moved, he was a minister, like a Unitarian divine, a minister. But as he moved from the church to nature and art for his inquiry, he, especially in his essay, The Poet, made the first great, radical, in my opinion, statement about art making produced in my country. And what he advocated, he wrote about the poetry, the poet, but it could apply to any other art form. And what he advocated, what he wanted, was art as a total endeavor, as something that would reveal one's deepest consciousness, that would be experimental, and what he wanted was for artists to find the forms that they needed, no matter how unconventional, no matter how strange. And he was doing this in like the 1840s. At one point he just wrote, "For we are not pans and barrows, nor even porters of the fire and torch bearers, but children of the fire." That's what he wanted for artists and for poets, to be a child of the fire, totally involved with this heated creativity. At another point in that very same essay, Emerson announced, and this is it's one of these great moments in Emerson that you read and then you're like, then you think about it, then you go back to it, and then you're like, what? He just wrote, "Art is the path of the creator to his work." Like, wait a minute. Like, I thought that art was the photograph taken by the photographer that's on the wall, or the sculpture made by the sculptor, or the painting made by the painter. But way back in the 1840s, Emerson's turning things around and saying art is the path of the creator to his work, the artist's way of thinking, living, dreaming, breathing, of living one's work. And then at another point in the very same essay, at a time when there were rather strict rules, it might have been the same in Finnish, strict rules for what a poem should be, whether it's a sonnet or an ode or a pastoral. There were rules about this. Emerson broke everything apart, and he said, meters are like the rhythm of a poem. For it is not meters, but a meter-making argument that makes a poem, a thought so passionate and alive. And basically what he was announcing way back in 1844 was that artists have the freedom and perhaps even the responsibility, based on what they have to convey, to find their own forms, no matter how unusual, no matter how seemingly ridiculous at certain times, capable of conveying their driving ideas. And he affected many people with this impassioned approach to art at that point, including Walt Whitman, still our greatest poet in the American tradition, who was kind of like a not exactly failed, but not exactly successful journalist in New York City. And the word simmering in English? It's like when water is hot but not boiling. It's like on a fire. Late in his life, the great Whitman wrote, "I was simmering, simmering, simmering. Emerson brought me to a boil." And what boiled out of Whitman was was Leaves of Grass, a book of poems that he would work on for the rest of his life, which are visionary, expansive, erotic, homoerotic in Victorian America, sensual, spiritual, everything at the same time. Emerson also greatly affected, and I'm sure you have a tradition like this in Finland, romantic painters of the 19th century. For instance, Thomas Moran, with his painting from Wyoming. One of Emerson's big things is that nature it's not the church, but God and divinity is everywhere in nature, and one needs to go out and let this energy flow into you and you into it, and then you make art as out of this exchange. There's a great moment in another essay called Nature, when Emerson, who had a lot of theories about ecstatic experiences in nature, but he didn't describe what they're like, except for this great moment in nature. And it's a great moment. It's a famous passage that goes, "Crossing a bare common." That's the Boston Commons, a park in Boston. "Crossing a bare common in snow puddles at twilight under a clouded sky, with no expectation of good fortune, I'm glad to the brink of fear. I become a transparent eyeball." love that proto-surreal transparent eyeball, the world flowing into Emerson and Emerson into the world. And that's what he wanted. Albert Bierstadt, German immigrant, was listening, and he went out to the West to paint these remarkable, almost pre-cinematic images of the Rocky Mountains and of the Sierra Nevadas. In California, the great Frederick Church, who's sort of leaning toward Disney at this point with his colors, was doing the same. But you could call this as kind of pre-cinema, pre-maximal approach to art. But at the same time, a lesser known group was very close to Emerson in Boston called the Luminists, and they were painting quietly, almost like dreaming paintings onto the canvas, just their local places. In Massachusetts, the Atlantic Ocean, ponds and stuff like Fitzhenry Lane. And what they wanted was absolutely this transparent eyeball moment in which the world is shining and lovely and charged with spiritual power. Or Martin John. Mm-hmm.
What was the name of that?
The last one?
Yes.
It's great. His name is Fitz. F-I-T-Z, the Luminists, because they're the luminous meaning like working with light. But it's great because for many decades he was called Fitzhugh Lane, and only recently has scholarship figured out that his real name is Henry. His middle name is Henry. There's a little aside for you. Or Martin Johnson Heed. See, these are reveries. These are just ecstatic, quiet, meditative views of nature. So this was the circle right around Emerson in the 1840s and 1850s. But Emerson's influence in America continues. It continues to the great Edward Hopper. So we talked at the university somewhat about Hopper today, who for his whole life was like a scholar of Emerson. He went to Emerson's writings for nutrition, for sustenance. And look at they look exhausted. You know, these vacationers, they're in the 20th century. It doesn't look great, but still this light is coming in, and it's bearing with it a reminder of Emerson's ecstasies. Barnett Newman is one of the great abstract painters of the 20th century in the US or anywhere. And with his famous zips, these stripes, zips, they're like very strong visual forces, but also he saw them as like openings to the universe. When he was young and got married, he had no job. He was a substitute art teacher in a high school. He couldn't even get a position as a high school art teacher. But when they got married, his wife said she wants to go on their honeymoon, not to the Bahamas, not to the Gran Canaria Islands, but to Concord, Massachusetts, home of Emerson and Transcendentalism. So the young Barnett Newman went right to the source of American Romanticism at his honeymoon. Mark Rothko was influenced as well with abstract paintings that ever any of you been close to Rothko? So like it's very a strong visual force, but there's power coming from behind the layers of colors, you know, and you're looking right at it, but it also seems immense. Distances, immensities are all operating here. Very Emersonian desire. This is Dan Flavin, who starts working directly with light. He used to be a painter, painting, simulating light, and he starts working directly with light, and also makes these enthralling wonderful meditative environments. Or Agnes Martin in New Mexico, she left New York City right when she was getting famous to completely engage with the vast New Mexico landscape and bring those qualities of light and distances and the desert into her paintings. Or Walter de Maria, any of you been here? Called Lightning Field? You have to make an appointment to go there. It's a square kilometer of upright metal poles in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. And when certain situations happen, there is a profound dialogue between artwork and world. Very Emersonian, transparent eyeball idea. The sizzling power of the world flows into the art, and the art into the world. Or James Turrell, undoubtedly the greatest Quaker artist of our lifetimes. This is a work, any of you seen this work? Experienced it? You know what it is? When you first see this work, and he has several versions, you look up and you think you're looking at like a ceiling fresco, or maybe a video projection, or maybe it's just a painting. And then you realize, and I've seen the shock in some people when they figured out what it is the real sky. The real sky, and he made it such a way that there's no depth. So you just look up and there it is. Emerson wrote in his journals, this bringing together Bible and earth. The sky is the daily bread of the eyes. And so Turrell, so you look at this work, but you're also dealing with immensities. Once again, a transparent eyeball moment. Once again, for centuries, painters have been painting the sky. For quite some time, photographers have been photographing the sky, and then Turrell comes along and works with the real sky, this section of vastness. Turrell's also making immersive color in environments, that you're just surrounded by pure color. Or Ronnie Horn, the great Ronnie Horn, it's a woman, R-O-N-I, with her glass sculptures that are also like sections of water, of vastness, of sky. Or her really great, those of you who are photographers, if you don't know Ronnie Horn, it'd be great to look into her. Her work's called either Blackwater or Some Thames, little moments of the Thames River, in which just the surface of water becomes like a giant landscape. This is in. So you mean the name of the artist or of the work? The Some is a great title. Some Thames. The Thames River in England. This is in Western Iceland. Any of you been to Iceland? No one's been to Iceland? I happen to be, for some peculiar reason, I'm an art writer and curator, but I'm also a mini expert in contemporary Icelandic art. Go figure. It's true. I've been there many times. I've written up a storm about Icelandic artists, and I love it. This is Ronnie Horn's Library of Water, way in the west. Columns filled with water from glaciers that are melting now because of global warming. And there, at her work, a transparent eyeball moment, you look at water and through water toward really big water outside. A total fluid exchange, once again, between artwork and world. And here is the last sort of introductory work I show you, Robert Smithson's great spiral jetty in Utah at the Great Salt Lake. Anyone been there? I highly recommend to go there. In my opinion, one of the 20th century's greatest sculptures. It's just rocks and earth formed right from the beach, formed into a spiral. But it's complicated because the spiral shape refers to the microscopic structures of salt crystals and also to the spiral shapes of immense distant galaxies, millions of light years distant. So universe, cosmos, and Earth is conflated there. You can go there. That's me, several years ago. You can camp there, not because camping is allowed, but because, thankfully, the power of the US government or the Utah government just doesn't reach that far. It's too remote. Nobody cares. The only thing you need to really bring is water, because it's really salty, and something about our bodies does not like salt on this level. But it's really good to go there, because you see how this sculpture behaves. It's much smaller than you'd think, and it's so sensitive. It's changing all the time. It comes together, and it's falling apart. It's breaking apart. And sometimes it is so extraordinarily beautiful, white and shining and lovely in blue, in soft blue water. So now I want to move on to the world with Katharina Grosse, and Emerson in mind. She's from Germany. With Emerson in mind, with this meter-making argument idea in mind, with the idea that art making is an endeavor that involves great freedom, great risk and research, and revelation of consciousness all together. This is Katharina Grosse. This is when I first met her, a little bit after she was in art school, making pretty good paintings, but not like unbelievable. Talented, of interest, but I wouldn't say that they're like the greatest paintings I've ever seen in my life. But she's still young. But things begin to shift and change as you see what's happening. And then here comes the Emersonian moment, in my opinion, meter-making argument. She makes a radical decision, either by her mind or her instincts, to move off the canvas into the real space, into the walls and ceiling of the actual space. And she makes the radical decision to not make permanent paintings, although she still does that, but to make temporary works, temporary paintings. Now she's world famous, but many of her greatest works, they don't exist. Like, they happen, they're there, and then they're gone. They're painted over. She made a radical, in my opinion, Emersonian decision to exchange her paintbrush for a spray gun and canvas for wall. This is in West Texas, at Marfa, Texas. Her abstracted West Texas sunset. She made a radical decision to go for broke with color and all its power. And so when you're in a Katharina Grosse installation, you're surrounded by color. The painting is coming at you from every which way, jutting into the room, changing the whole nature of a rectangular, a rectilinear room with this powerful display of color. And when you go to Katharina Grosse installation, it's really good to go there and then go back the next day, because it will just look different. You'll see new things. Your consciousness will be affected in a new way. And this is in Berlin, scary building in Berlin, gray, sharp. Yikes. But her work is rising like colorful steam on the outside of the building. One woman radically transforming such a hefty, powerful building. And once I was talking with her, I've written about, I love her work, I love it. I was talking with her, and she was just like, Gregory, you know what it's really about? I was like, no, Katharina, why don't you tell me? And she said it's all anarchic sexuality. Okay? I was like, sure, Katharina, sounds good. And she keeps, in an Emersonian way, she keeps pushing her research. She keeps pushing her energies. This is her recent big show at Mass MoCA in Western Massachusetts, a great museum in old 19th century buildings. But this weighs tons. It's like soil and fake soil and rocks and fake rocks made out of foam. A total mix, mediated nature and real nature, like this. Boulders, which could also be from like a movie set, invented boulders. A little bench that you can sit on as if you're in a park. Such great transparent eyeball moment that her work rises up the side of the building, the window, and you can see the Berkshire Mountains out there. What the nature flooding in, flowing in, the light from outside, and the work appealing to, leaning toward the outside as well. Emptiness, this work weighed tons, but emptiness was a huge part of it. Just the air, the very air, emptiness.
What was the title for this exhibition?
That's actually, I know it, but I forgot it. I'll get it for you in a second. You can look it up in a different. It was one of the great. You like it?
Yeah.
Radical painting. She's gone very far. This happened the first time I wrote for Art in America. I was invited. I was to go to Istanbul to write about the Istanbul Biennial in 1995. And this is Ayşe Erkman, probably one of the two greatest Turkish artists right now, other being Kutluk Ataman, video maker extraordinaire. And here's the work. I never met Ayşe. I didn't know anything about her. Since I've gone on to do a lot of things with her. But here's the work, and you can see if you like it. Everyone is showing art, sculptures, paintings, photographs, and here's what she showed, a freight elevator. The old working elevator in a former customs warehouse. So this elevator had been really hard-working elevator for 100 years at the Bosporus, carrying freight and cargo and this kind of stuff. But she turned this elevator, this old, dirty freight elevator, into something gleaming and wonderful, like with new metal. So it's like it had a beautiful new suit. It was dressed to go to like an important party. And also it was given a break with this line in the front, no one could enter it. So after 100 years of carrying heavy things, the elevator it didn't have to carry anything. It could have a rest. And as you stood looking at it, all of a sudden it did this. It left, and it was gone. And for the whole duration of the show, the elevator kept going every now and then between the second and the first floor. So like a nervous elevator. It didn't know if it belonged on the second floor where the cool people are, or maybe the cooler people are on the first floor. You know how you could feel nervous at an opening? But just a rhythm, also a fluctuating rhythm, up and down, the rhythm. The tide comes in and the tide comes out. The ships arrive, the ships depart like they've been departing and arriving for eons in Istanbul. One civilization rises while another one declines, and that will be reversed in due course. Just these rhythms, these swinging motions of the world, that's all communicated by this simple elevator. And the brilliance of this woman is she works, among many things, she works with actual sites, not bringing usually autonomous artworks into a site, into a space, but working with what's already there, and oftentimes in such an unusual way. This was her first big show in Berlin at the DAAD gallery, and she didn't take anything there. What she did was just lower the normal lights down, like this. And when you go, and they're still behaving like normal, they're still shining, they're still lighting everything, but now they're a force that you have to deal with, and you have to not like smash into them, and you have to pay attention. And it's so simple, but so complex as well. And she's also bringing in a very subtle way, references to some of the most important mosques in Istanbul, where at the front of the mosque, it's also lights that at Suleiman Mosque and these other places, the lights go way down, almost to the floor. So she's bringing in a little bit of Istanbul into Berlin. This is Münster, Germany. And this is the famous cathedral in Münster, Germany. It's a very Catholic city where every 10 years there's a show called Sculpture Projects Münster. Have any of you know about this? It's a great thing. And for that show, artists don't show works in a museum, but they show works at different unusual sites around town. And Aisha Erkman wanted to work with the famous cathedral. The cathedral has quite a history in Münster, because this is a Catholic city, but for a couple years, many centuries ago, it was taken over by the radical Protestants, the Anabaptists. And when the Catholic forces came back in, they killed the Anabaptist leaders and hung their bodies in cages on the outside of the church's steeple. So it's like quite an intense history. But she wanted to work with that church, and so she submitted a proposal. Why not? She was interested in the clock, that doing something with the clock. She got back a response. Sorry, we don't think it's going to work. But, thank you for the proposal, but it's not going to work. She's like, oh, no, that's too bad. I'll make another proposal. So she did, and she got back the response. No, it's not going to work. She made a third different proposal, got back the same response, and then figured out the answer will always be no, for two main reasons. The church, first, lesser reason, they didn't want this kind of strange contemporary art in the church. Greater reason, by no means did they want a work by a woman from a Muslim country in their church, okay? Even her famous curator, Caspar Koenig, told Aisha Erkman, Aisha, that's it. There's nothing else I can do. You're going to have to find a new solution. You're not going to be able to work with this church. So what Aisha did, and she divides her time between Istanbul and Berlin, she researched in German law how high above the top of the steeple the church owns. How many meters above the top? And she figured out at what point the air is free above the church. And so she did this work. She went to the Landesmuseum, which is next to it, a famous museum, and went to their storage site, a little outside Münster, where they have all sorts of 15th and 16th century statues, religious and secular. And she put the statues under a helicopter. And the statues went flying through the air. And they flew over Münster, like the beginning of Fellini's La Dolce Vita, with the statue of Christ above Rome. And they flew and they circled the steeple 3 times. And the priests and the officials interrupted their service to announce that this woman is evil. And I was there. And I can tell you that evilness was not part of it, and joy was completely part of it. And there were kids running through the streets. There were grown-ups throwing their hats. People just flocked after this gorgeous, wonderful commotion, a time when angels flew for real in their city and didn't just pretend to fly in the paintings. She likes to make surprises. She invites you to her art. She invites you to a museum, and all of a sudden you find that you're in the zoo with Keti and Assam, two tigers, that she turned the whole exhibition space into a place that was like really great for two tame tigers who for the whole duration of the show had a blast in the museum. They had a great time, and the people could just look from the outside. In St. Gallen, Switzerland, I don't know if this happened in Finland, but it's possible. In St. Gallen, the Natural History Museum and the Art Kunstverein St. Gallen are in the same building. Part of it is the Natural History Museum with all the old animals and the fossils, and the contemporary art is on the other side. So she got an idea, why is this? What if I bring them together? What if I bring them together by making an absolutely perfect alarm clock? Not alarm clock, cuckoo clock. You know, when the cuckoo comes out, when it strikes 12. And she had it timed to like a computer in Germany. So it's like by the millisecond. And so at 1 o'clock, say like 1 o'clock, that it would go off, and an animal would come out. And these are motorized, so they're advancing on you. At 2 o'clock, animals from the world, from the collection. 3 o'clock, all of a sudden, this advances. 4 o'clock, multiple animals are advancing on you. 5 o'clock, some kind of scary buzzard appears. And that's the way it is with her. This is Venice. I bet you some of you have been to Venice. You know that it's beautiful. And you know the water stinks oftentimes. It's not good. You don't want to get anywhere near this water, right? It's pretty bad. This is Ayşe Erkmen representing Turkey at the Venice Biennale. And I told you that she works with things that are already there, and the most important thing in Venice is water, so she decided she's going to work with water from Venice. But in this way, a really quite beautiful, colorful sculpture, really nice, that quite literally brought water from the lagoon into it, purified it, and made it perfect. You could drink it, except Venice wouldn't allow people to drink it because she just couldn't get the permission. She wanted it, but it's okay. So what she did, her second plan, she just brought the water in, purified it, and then very quietly through a pipe released it out into another part of Venice. A little gift of goodness to the surrounding city. And here's the pure water. And here's Ayşe drinking the pure water. And I drank it too, because I know the artist and I wrote for the catalog. So I had a nice glass of Venice water and lived to tell the tale. And for you photographers, many of you are photographers, this is a flexible artist who does all sorts of things. You know how at the beginning of a museum or a gallery, there's often catalogs and announcements like this kind of stuff here. This is her show in Istanbul, all these kind of announcements, but what they are two Google searches, like selfie searches for Ayşe Erkmen, conducted in Istanbul, and Ayşe Erkmen conducted in Germany, on two sides of the gallery. And every JPEG or TIFF was was presented exactly with the resolution that she found in an exact order. So you see Aisha Erkman, there she is. There she's changing. That's a surprise. Now she's really changing. Now she's, for some reason, become Aisha Kulin. Now she's an old dimmer from decades ago. Now she's married to Ali Bubel, and her name is Aisha Bubel in some like little Turkish town. Now she's a go-go dancer and a little kid. And that's the way it works. That's the way it worked for the whole show. Once again, with Emerson, this is Sebastiaan Bremer. With Emerson in mind, the stuff that I told you about, a meter-making argument, going far with your work, with risks, trying new things, trying to find the way to deal with your big and urgent concerns. He painted for 10 years and painted quite well. Good paintings. And then came the real shift. He started to work with found photographs, like from his family. Found photographs, and this is one of the first ones. And the way he works with it is to like draw with ink or paint, but mostly different kinds of ink directly on the print. That was the first version. This is a second. You still see like he's got 1 foot squarely in the world of painting. But now things really begin to change. And the dots become tiny and they're swirling. And if you spend a lot of, if you're close to these works, you're looking at historical things or archival images from the deep past, memories, traces, but you're looking at it through present consciousness, the artist in the present tense responding to past things. And there'll be just like little images here, different things happening, and also abstraction like crazy, a kind of gauzy scrim in the front. See a seaside picture like this or something. Just a little kid in the water, but because of the way he transformed it, it all becomes so hypnotic and psychedelic and meditative and lovely. It's obscuring, but also revealing different parts of the works behind and all they mean, including a house in Brazil that he visits many times with his Brazilian wife, or a portrait of the artist as a sullen, cigarette-smoking teenager in Amsterdam, or a portrait of the artist's young son, Tobias, who looks downright angelic. And also, Sebastiaan Bremer he's sort of becoming now the next great Dutch painter, but he's not a painter, you know? Like photographs, found photographs plus ink drawings equals remarkable time-traveling painting. And he's seriously dealing with the history of Dutch painting through the ages as well. And here you can see the influence profoundly. And then all of a sudden, with one series, things shift so remarkably. Another Emerson. He's got his technique down cold, but he totally changes it with just these ink dots that are like beautiful bubbles rising. And these are rising to the sky. And these are family photos from the early 70s when his family went to the Swiss Alps. And it's like his mountain joy works. And he wanted to make works about happiness because he thinks that happiness is not addressed that often in the arts. And so he evoked Schiller's famous Ode to Joy from Germany. And this is the kind of stuff that he arrived at. In Venice this year, in May, something wonderful is happening in the United States Pavilion. Yay for that. A great visionary artist whose name is Joan Jonas, pioneer of video art, of performance art, many different things, who for a long time has been one of the best artists in the States, but not nearly so well known as many other artists, including many other male artists. Now, at the age of 77, this woman is being understood, as being brought to the forefront as one of the great artists of the era, and I'm very happy about that. This is Vertical Roll, which is at the origins of video art. This is from 1972, and it's still studied up and down by scholars of video art, this work, in which she basically, mostly it's her, sometimes it's another woman, wears this like absurdly feminine costume, completely like over-the-top ridiculous femininity, and you'll see what happens. So she's climbing, she's like this ultra-feminine costume, she's like climbing into the screen but being driven out at the same time. This is from the same era. And Organic Honey's Visual Telepathy, that's the name of this. When she became her alter ego, Organic Honey, with the costumes, you'll see what happens. And for this, the young Joan Jonas referred to herself as an erotic electronic sorceress. And she did this not at a museum, just in her loft, and invited a few friends. Groundbreaking, one of the most important early video performance installations. And she's exploring her use of masks and costumes and multiple things happening at the same time. You've seen a lot of shows like this now in which there's videos here and there and sculptures. She's at the origins of this. And the circus was a huge influence for her. She said that, the three-ring circus with multiple things happening at the same time. She's a pioneer of installation art. At this point, remarkable things happening from everywhere. And so such lovely human moments happen throughout her work. While it's such a risky approach and aesthetic, but exactly what you just saw. And I told you the circus was important for her, but also a kind of carnival-like transformationalism is important for her all the time. For example, it's really normal that a woman would go for a walk with her dog in the woods, but not like this, in Nova Scotia, in Canada, carrying this flag. And this is called waltz. So once again, a woman walking with her dog in the woods, that's normal, but things don't get much more normal than that. But then in this work, waltz, that all of a sudden it seems like a solitary pageant, a celebration, something just so lovely, a spectacle. in a way that's so good. And then there's that white dog, which you see. And that's one of many white dogs that have appeared in Joan Jonas's life and her work through the years. And that makes her something of a different kind of pioneer, a pioneer of white dog art. This is how Waltz ends. Like this, just this blindfolded figure at the beach in Nova Scotia, and then this. It opens into immensities. I told you that Emerson wrote about the sky as the daily bread of the eyes, and the sound is just made by recording of thrown stones. And this is reanimation, the work that has now brought her to huge attention in her mid-70s, all based, she oftentimes is basing works on writing. And she'll respond in her very many wonderful poetic ways. And in this case, she's responding to Nobel Prize-winning Halldór Laxness from Iceland and his book Under the Glacier, which in Icelandic is really, it's like Christianity. And the glacier is the great Halldór Laxness's meditation on God and geology, how to bring these two things together. This is how her work looked. It takes, one of the things about her is a work can take very many different forms. It's a video, it's an installation that changes, it's a performance. This is a documenta, last documenta, and this is just one part of it.
Reanimation. Better to be silent. That is what relation does. That is what the lilies of the field do. Are you sure the flowers are silent? If a sensitive microphone were placed to be silent. As a matter of fact, others are ready to help. There is, for instance, the weather, and there is the law of gravity, and last but not least, time. No one is a match for them.
This work, so that Iceland and glaciers and volcanoes are fundamental, but the actual footage was recorded way, way up north in Norway on a little island, a really remote place. And the images are extraordinary of the mountains. And as you can see, she's channeling mountains, glaciers directly into her work. And she's also bringing in intensities of performance. That's the artist. The 75-year-old artist at that point. And she's drawing, a lot of her, she's drawing, but she's drawing on snow. You know, so the drawing is going to be gone forever. And she's going on trips, literally, but also in her soul and psyche. And we go with her. And we go listening to yoik music from the Samis of northern Norway.
Oh
once again with the mountains. And then this is a video of the animals in which in her actual performance, she's like trying to feed them, give them food. She's making Iceland out of odds and ends, just like drawing, making a little Icelandic sculpture. And here I was sitting in the front row of her remarkable performance in Brooklyn, and I'll just play you a little bit. Oh. And I can tell you, I'm a tough art critic. I was sitting in the front row in total tears at this moment. Last artist I'd like to show you, with Emerson in mind, the stuff I was talking about, a meter-making argument, risk and adventure. This is the great Roman Signer. Many of his sculptures only exist for a few seconds, and they're gone forever. And they come to you, they come to us as documentation, photos or videos, but the actual work is gone forever. He's not, by and large, he's not putting works in the world, he's working with the world, with gravity, with flowing water, with air, with fire, with transformation. He's interested in making works that involve transformation, when one thing becomes another. And the whole reason I even know this artist, at least in the beginning, was I was in Paris in my very earliest days when I wanted to write about art and had no one wanted me to write for them. And I was in Galerie Anne de Villepoix, because good gallery, just because I'd met Anne de Villepoix, so I went there to say hi, and I saw this work. And it was just a balloon, a helium balloon that he tied out in Switzerland next to a waterfall. And you watch it, and the balloon drifts toward the waterfall. And you're like, oh no, this is not going to end up well for the balloon. And you're like just identifying with this poor, flimsy, lovely balloon, and it's like, oh. And then it like gets whomped by the waterfall and stunned, and it's driven back, but it doesn't pop. And then it's just physics, right? The artist didn't do anything else. It's just, and then the balloon does it again. It gets closer and closer. It is funny, but it's also profound. And its rhythms of attraction and repulsion and closeness and separation and trust and anxiety, all being suggested by something so simple, so elemental as a balloon and a waterfall. This is a Signer sculpture out in Switzerland. Something happens, I told you, transformation and abrupt transformation. All of a sudden, the buckets explode, the water goes flying into the air, cans, like coffee cans, go zooming into the sky. It's called Schwarzes Tuch, black cloth, this work. The cloth goes up, and it reveals Signer himself sitting, wearing protective motorcycle helmet. He doesn't want to get hurt with these things. Sometimes you've had enough of all your duties as artists or whatever you do, all the responsibilities that you have at Aalto University, for instance. This is a sculpture by Signer. Uh-oh, you can imagine. Here it is. So beautiful. And it only just lasts for a few seconds. This is a broken down old hotel that he's worked with many times. Sculpture. There it is. There it is. There it is. It's gone. Another sculpture. And this is an artist now at the top of the world, right? And once again in his 70s. But it took the art world really a long time to catch up with this genius. And a long time. Into his 60s, he was still struggling mightily and living in St. Gallen, which is hardly the center of the art world. And then something happened that helped him a lot. A very good director named film director, Peter Lichty, made a movie called Signer's Koffer, in German, Signer's Suitcase. And this turned this amazing sculpture as events guy into a kind of cult figure in Europe in the early 90s or mid 90s. And so I'm going to show you a couple excerpts. So any like strange, that's from the film. That's not from the artist. Oh, sorry. That's it. Transformation and change. When Emerson wrote way back in that text I told you about, the quality of the imagination is to flow and not to freeze. And Signer is completely involved with the flowing, changing imagination. For instance, taking one of these office chairs down to a lonely little Swiss creek, putting it there, moving it from the office into nature, wearing gloves, it's a very good idea, heavy gloves, and holding powerful rockets in his hand. And he starts spinning like crazy in the middle of nowhere. An amusement park, a private amusement park ride in the middle, in some a place in Switzerland. It's normal for a man in his 60s or early 70s to sit at a park bench reading the newspaper. It's not normal to sit with a powerful, explosive fire advancing on you from behind that you can't see. But luckily, he's wearing the right clothes. As he reads the newspaper, he's engulfed by the fire, and that's it. Goodbye to the news, to politics and sports and wars and troubles and economic issues. He's just left holding his little ashes. Now the question is, why to work so hard at making a painting or a photograph? Might be easier than that. wait a second. Wait till you see the painting. So lovely. An explosive charge went through him, through his paintbrush onto the canvas, and there it is. In Finland, I bet anything you like to go camping, like I do. I go a lot with my son, Maximilian, in the States, also many other places. Signe does this too. You know, you wake up in your tent in the morning, you put on your clothes and go out. The tent protected you. For this work, he woke up in the morning, left the tent quickly and for good reason, because the whole tent exploded right behind him. Goodbye to safety and everything. And the whole work, as a sculpture, it involves the tent, the smoke, the person, the grass, the forest, as an expanded sculpture. Let's say this is a painting by Signe in remote place in Poland. His wife, Alexandra, is Polish. And so for this, he goes just skiing, trailing festive pink smoke behind him. A moment, his moment in time, just a little segment of what he did. And this is his painting, let's say, that disappeared again. But a little moment, and he's well aware. Signer's funny. It's also beautiful. And it's also profoundly touching, because he knows that we're temporary. He knows mortality is everywhere in his work. Fragility is everywhere in his work. This is in Iceland, a place that he loves. And he goes a lot. And if you use umbrellas at this place in Iceland, you can forget it, because the wind is so strong and the rain comes at you from every which way that the umbrellas will have no meaning. This is a tragic tale of two umbrellas in love. This is his sculpture. Like two lovers, two dancers, the umbrellas do their thing, but then it ends with such sadness and destruction. If you go to a place like this out in the interior of Iceland, you'll be completely alone with the world, alone with the mineral world. There's no mammals there, even the birds don't go there. You're alone with the earth. It's so quiet that you can hear silence at these kind of places. And this is Signe out at the place, and he has like a snoring issue. That's from the movie. You would think that an artist who's also an expert kayaker would go for a kayak ride in the water, which is over here. But no, he goes for a kayak ride on the road, and it's one of many attack the kayak pieces he's done. The cows are as much a part of the sculpture as anything else, although it wasn't planned. I would think, and he thought as well, that this noise would make the cows would want to run away, but instead they start, especially the little ones, because they're just so happy about this break in their Swiss country routine. Like, wow, look what's happening here. This is a sculpture by Signer in Iceland, just a little table balanced in 4 silver pails nudged off into the great ocean. It's not going to last long out there in the tough Atlantic. But for this moment, it's so lovely, it's so graceful, and it's so simple, just a table and 4 pails. And this is a figurative sculpture by Roman Signer on a little lane. Normally he's told me that outdoors he feels most free in German, and outdoors is where poetry happens for him. These are the typical Swiss boots everyone has to keep your feet dry, but instead he put water in them and explosives, and they blew up. And the water went up, and it's a bedazzling, dazzling instant in the air. A sculpture that lasted 1 second. And it's funny, and it's so beautiful. And he also knows, as you do, that much of our bodies is water, and that we're also temporary, that our time is brief and beautiful, and that's all right there in this one temporary sculpture.
Thank you. It was great, and it was a so good artist. You presented us beautiful work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, such a interesting and poetic lecture. We're very happy to share this moment with you.
If anyone has any question,
yes, please.
Now might be the time to ask, but it's also okay if you don't.
Yeah.
But yes, sir.
But I didn't exactly actually remember if you told that. How did you meet Emerson in the first place? What happened? What were you doing that when you met?
With Emerson?
Yeah.
Emerson, every American, you encounter Emerson somehow. I'm sure it's the same way in Finland with some famous 19th century writer. But then you forget about it. And then I studied him again in college because I was studying literature. I know something about poetry, and so he's someone important. But it was only years later that I began to make this connection between Emerson and certain kinds of contemporary art. So it was like a sort of slow slow process, and also because I've worked sometimes with extremely good contemporary artists who are dealing with complex questions of landscape and nature in a new way, in a late 20th century, 21st century way. And then there's also just my concern that art be, Richard Tuttle, the great post-minimal American sculptor, has recently talked of art as being like nutrition, food for the soul, And I'm from the art world, and I really want it to be like that. And I think, I don't know how you feel, but I mean, art changes my life and consciousness and helps me to live and has opened up gigantic elements of the world and touches my deepest soul and feelings and all the old stuff, and it happens now for me. And so Emerson is he's like a prime figure. And then I really love this idea about art making as transformation and exploration, not just as making something wonderful or lovely, that is going to be in the gallery. It's like art has a lot to, I think, and very much to do with consciousness, like hugely. And Emerson is like a prophet of this. so that he became really, over time, important. I mean, there's other people too that are important to me, but he is. And I don't know how you all feel, but I think it's important for me to be mobile in time. Like so I'm an art critic and art writer. I don't even like the word critic, but I'm an art writer right now in 2014, but I think it's a really good idea if I pay attention to the 1840s or like that these things get more mixed up, that it not just be about like what's the important thing in the last year or 2 years. I like a big approach, a bigger approach.